Hey everyone, it is Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this interview today and video, and to this entire world of healing trauma, nervous system health, and all things neuroplasticity. Today, I am talking with my colleague and husband, Seth Lyon. We did a chat last year, which we will post below, so you can check that out, where we were talking all about shame, healthy shame, toxic shame, and going into Seth's history with that whole topic. So today, he's back, and we're going to talk about a little bit of his history, his origin story, getting into this world of healing trauma for real. And we purposely titled this talk, Why Meditating and Cold Plunging in Paradise Will Not Heal Your Trauma. So, Seth, what does that mean?
Well, I think we titled it that because that's kind of what I did. And, I went into the world of healing not from a knowing about trauma. I went into it from a standpoint of consciousness expansion, energy work, like the whole ascension paradigm. I was
Mm-hmm.
really, I did a meditation retreat in my early 20s that was a total awakening experience, really powerful and positive.
Mm-hmm.
Gave me a lot of really important tools that would be useful later on when I found the trauma work. But, when I went into this sort of 13-year period where I dropped off grid and basically lived in the woods and in small communities and just not engaged with the world, it was not knowing that I even had trauma. It was just
Mm-hmm.
an interest in healing and developing my consciousness and exploring. As, that continued, I started to get a little bit more hints that, like, oh, there's maybe something deeper, but I didn't know how to get at it. But mostly I was kind of oblivious to what was in my system, and
Right.
I wasn't touching it, even though I was, literally in paradise. Like, I lived for 7 years at a hot springs resort where we met, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I was, hot soaking every day, cold plunging every day. Just, it was paradise. It was gorgeous, and easy lifestyle, community, all these things that people in this world tend to think are necessary for healing, and yet none of it actually touched my trauma at all.
Yeah.
So that, hence the
Uh,
title.
Totally. And the irony is that it wasn't until you were living in a city, the big
Mhm.
bad city of Vancouver, not that it's very big, but much bigger than what you were living with and around in Oregon. That's when the real work started. Um, you know, what's interesting, and I don't want to talk about our dynamics of relationship today, we'll leave that for another
Sure.
time. But when I met you, I had no clue how screwed up you were. I'll
Yeah.
be really honest.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to paint a picture. So I didn't realize how messed up you were until we were living in British Columbia. At the time we were in Whistler. So I guess you could say we were in a little bit of a paradise.
Yeah. It was like a
Um,
transition paradise. Yeah.
yeah, because I was still living there. There was a lot of stuff going on with my system, which again we'll leave out for another day, and maybe you can interview me around that
Mm.
process because it's a big one. But I remember hosting a seminar
Mm.
at the house we were living in because it had a big enough living room where one of my colleagues was coming up to do an introduction around somatic experiencing, the work that we both do and practice and are studied in, trained in. And you like left.
Yeah.
Like everyone was there, good people,
Yeah.
safe
I
people.
left before everyone was there.
And then I'm like, where the fuck does Seth go? And I
Yeah.
was completely like, what's going on here? Um, and so what happened
Yeah,
in
I
that
use this
moment?
story a lot actually when with my clients to talk about social anxiety, and to explain to people what it's like. So yeah, I grew up, as so many people who grew up with trauma did, in this situation where, in order for me to maintain my safety, I had to be very aware of how everyone in my environment was feeling, what their mood was, the
Hmm.
tone of voice. And I would shape myself and my behavior, appropriately with each person, such to match where they were, such that I would be okay. So it's this very chameleon-y kind of thing that many people learn how to do when you're growing up in an unsafe environment. What that leads to, though, is this pattern of feeling like, okay, in order to maintain safety, I have to assess where somebody else is and then change myself appropriately. So I was sitting, upstairs as people started coming in, and one person came in. It's like, okay, here's some person, and I have to, okay, what do I have to do to navigate this?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and then another person, and then another person, and by the time 3 or 4 people arrived, I was just completely overwhelmed because I didn't know any of them, and my system was trying to navigate how do I have to be with each of these people. I had no ability just to be solid in myself and
In
my
you.
own energy, right? So that just boom, I fled. Like I couldn't navigate that. And yeah, went and got a big beer and drove to the top of the subdivision and drank it. Waited for it to be over. Came home with my tail between my legs. So, it's like that's just a prime example of what was in my system that I didn't know until I started getting stimulus that was other than what was perfect and comfortable and like paradise, right? So, yeah, absolutely. That was a big indication, I think, for both of us. Like, oh, yeah, there's some work to do here.
So did you at that point know how, like, what social anxiety actually was? And
No,
you did not.
I just knew that I felt awful and I couldn't deal,
With
because this was
people.
before I started the SE training. It was the early days of our relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just knew that things felt bad and I had to leave.
So, there's this thing that we call social anxiety and fear going out. We could even say people will use the term agoraphobia, which
Mm,
is like the common term, classical term for it. And you were putting yourself into environmental circumstances up until then, in a sense, that made it such that you were in control all the time of when you would engage, when you wouldn't engage.
that's right.
And that was like the bomb that went off. And it sounds like you were even shocked that that was happening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. And because yeah, when I was living off grid, I mean, I spent a lot of time literally alone, like in the woods. When I was living in a small community, I was still very hermetic. I didn't really see very many people except for when I was working. And
Mm-hmm.
I could control that. If I would go to town, I could handle, the nearest town of Salem for like, 2 hours maybe, and then I'd start to feel overwhelmed and I'd have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very controlled. And as many would think, like, wow, like totally paradise, like hot springs and community, and there was, yoga classes every day, and there was massage, and it was good
Breath
food, all
work.
organic food, and it was in the forest, like all the good stuff, right? But it was still a management package that was a
Mm-hmm.
way of me from staying away from stuff that would trigger me. So yeah, it was like a bomb that went off when I sort of moved into the world, and that was just the beginning of it. Our relationship was the start of engaging those things, and then there was more challenges as we progressed, right? There was the
Yeah.
money thing, and there was work, having to be a professional, and then like working with clients, this whole evolution that happened that was just
Mm-hmm.
like one stimulus after the other into the system to try to,
Yeah.
it was just shaking things up and
Yeah.
pushing on me to confront these things. It's like really
So
I had to come out of paradise. I had to come out of the ideal conditions in order to actually heal. And of course I needed the right tools, right? And the right relationships, which is another important piece.
yeah, so in many ways, while we're at the beginning of our talk, you are the epitome of a success story
Mm,
of really abusive, emotional, verbal, physical abusive upbringing, divorced family,
mm,
addiction,
yep,
various addictions, not being successful with relationships,
yep,
having to hide
yep,
because you just didn't know how to engage. And so now you can and you like it and all those things. So I know the answer, but I want to hear your version of, because people ask the question all the time, Irene, cold plunges, will they help me regulate my nervous system?
Right.
Now, I'm going to preface this because we have a cold plunge in our
Yeah.
home
Oh yeah.
outside. We love going into freezing cold rivers
Yep.
after baking in the sun or being in a hot tub or being in a sauna. So we enjoy the benefits of hydrotherapy fully. And I did an interview with our friends Mason and Chelsea. So for those that haven't seen that, check that out. We'll post it near here. But tell me why, from your perspective, that was not enough. The fact
Mm.
that you were hydrotherapying all the
Hmm.
time, getting this cold exposure, but you were still riddled with PTSD, anxiety, bowel problems, addiction, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think the fact that I had that access to hydrotherapy, which is really, like, to clarify, it's about the hot, cold experience. It's not about the ice bath. It's a whole
No.
different thing. It's about getting really hot and then getting cold briefly as, like, a few seconds exposure to flush the system. So,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that I did that every day with all this complex early developmental trauma in me, that's really, I think, what kept me healthy, healthy,
Alive.
at least at a certain level, and
Yeah.
alive, really, with that, because I wasn't touching the trauma. Because
Mm-hmm.
that, hydrotherapy, yeah, very good. It was super helpful, but it's a profound experience, but it doesn't really touch what needs to happen in terms of unpacking dysregulation, right? It's
And
it's
I,
it's good.
yeah, and I'm going to add, so hold your thought. For those that don't know what the heck we're talking about with hydrotherapy, basically you're giving the body a stimulus of temperature change, in this case, say a sauna or a hot tub or a hot spring or a hot shower, warm shower, and then you're going into cold, and what happens is your blood vessels dilate when you're in the warm, and then when you go into the cold they contract. And if you do that a few times or even one time, it provides a cardiovascular effect that stimulates the system, but can calm it down.
Hmm.
In a healthy system and in a dysregulated system.
Because that very much was the effect. It was soothing. It did keep my system level. It was management, like I'm saying. But the thing is, to heal trauma, you have to get out of management. You have to get into the discomfort. You have to get into the dysregulation. You have to get into the uncomfortable. You
Mm-hmm.
have to not soothe sometimes. You have to not be in ideal circumstances sometimes. And that is the part that I think is really hard for some people to get. It's like, no, to get at these things, we want to go carefully. We want to be supported. We want to have the right tools, but you're going to have to eventually come face to face with the things you're terrified of, both within yourself, especially, but also in the external world, right? And that's what moving out of paradise and into, battle Babylon of the big city, as I saw it back then, that's what was necessary for me to even start my trauma healing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's leave the cold plunge stuff. Let's go into meditation. Because
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
and again, I believe in all these things, as I know you do. We
Yep.
both practice various forms of meditation, just like we do hydrotherapy.
Yep.
What were you missing when you were meditating, either in the forest in Oregon or even before? Because you left out that you lived in Hawaii, the jungles of Hawaii, for quite a while.
Yep. Yep.
Um, you were meditating, you were connecting to source, to God, whatever it might be. You did many Vipassana retreats, 10-day sits.
Yep.
What was good about that, and what was missing the mark with those?
Yeah. So there's many forms of meditation, and yeah, the one that I resonated the most with is Vipassana, which is can be very useful in terms of the tool that it gives you, which is the
Mm-hmm.
ability to track. Vipassana is basically just sitting in silence and tracking your internal experience in a very specific way. At least that's how it starts out,
Mm-hmm.
and then it grows from there. But so that can be very useful, first off. Like that tool, learning how to track, to follow what we call interoception, the internal experience, super valuable. However,
Mm-hmm.
when one enters into that, like I did, from a place of being already dysregulated, with a lot of what we call freeze in the system, this means that there were large parts of my physiology and my psyche that were not accessible to me because they were in shutdown, they were in freeze. All the ways that I had to numb myself to my experience growing up in order to survive was all still hanging around. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. So when a person goes into that experience with freeze in the system, what tends to happen, and this is what happened for me, is because I've my own nature for whatever reason, I have a very strong sort of spiritual ability.
Mm-hmm.
When that's coupled with freeze, what it enables is this ability to get sort of this real, like high spiritual elevated experience. And you're tracking, you're in your body as far as you know, you're totally in your body, you're feeling your body, but you're only feeling like these little pieces. There's so much that I was
Hairs.
missing. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much that I like, and I didn't know that I didn't know,
Yeah.
right? Like I thought that I was like, oh, I'm fully aware and becoming enlightened, and I'm, yes,
Enlightened and
yeah, connected to source, and yeah, I moved to Hawaii. I'm gonna go move to Hawaii, and I bought a one-way ticket to go meditate in the jungle. I had no money for years. I just that was my path, and there was so much that I was missing because I had that combination of like a spiritual ability and lots of freeze in the system. Now, the other thing that can happen in Vipassana, and in any form of meditation, but specifically something like Vipassana or mindfulness, where the goal is to be in your body, the other thing that can happen is people get totally overwhelmed and they flee. Their system blows up. And that's actually better if that happens, because then they leave the practice and they're not going to keep reinforcing their freeze like I did. So that's
yeah.
the thing. I got this really great tool of being able to track and sense myself. But then for the next, 13 years, however long it was until I moved into the city and met you and all that stuff, I was basically just kind of going on a hamster wheel where, it was good, it was pleasant, I felt, spiritual, connected to source, connected to the environment, but I wasn't really connected to myself, even though I thought I was. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the big dangers of meditation when there's trauma in the picture, for sure.
And the other clue, if you will, even though you had all this meditation time and cold plunge time and hydrotherapy time, nature is that your system was quite sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my digestion was, bad ever since I was a kid, chronically, just, IBS, really
Mm-hmm.
bad experiences with digestion, even though my diet was, vegetarian, organic for a long time. And then, when I started eating meat again, still all organic, healthy food, didn't matter because yeah, it wasn't, my system wasn't able to digest it properly because of the dysregulation. And also
Mm-hmm.
lots of really bad postural stuff, collapse in my structure, in my spine, which I know you saw early on, horrified as I bent over to pick something up.
Ah! I'll tell that story. So when we
Yeah,
met, just so people, it's a fun little fact. We met, and then 4 days later, you proposed, and that was 11 years ago.
yeah,
So it's worked out. But I remember seeing you like bend over in your cabin. You didn't have a shirt on. You probably didn't have anything on anyway. And you had this huge old man's kyphotic hump, which you couldn't see when you were standing up.
yeah.
Because you actually stood up pretty straight, but it was when you bent over and you had no ability to extend your spine.
Yeah,
That was my first little clue of, uh-oh.
yeah, yeah. What's packed
But
up in that system? Yeah,
but I didn't flee because I saw that. I just was like, oh boy, there's a lot of work to do here. Good thing I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner and an exercise specialist and all
yeah,
these other things. But so the thing that was also interesting to me, and I'm kind of giving away all the secrets, is you also stopped taking care of your body
mm,
for a portion of this time. Tell
right.
people about that, specifically your teeth.
Oh, that whole thing. Oh my God, no.
Sorry, I got to put you on the spot.
So yeah, this is again the dangers of spiritual bypass, right? So
This is why I'm asking.
yeah, this is when I was kind of in the height of my, spiritual delusion, when I was living on the Big Island, and yeah, I had all sorts of dental problems, all sorts of, decay. I knew like it was painful. I knew, but like I was convinced that I could heal my teeth, simply through prayer and meditation, and that even brushing my teeth was like too coarse of an experience. Like that was too mechanical. Like I was buying into the system by brushing my teeth. I went years without really brushing my teeth. And oops. So $7,000 to $10,000 of dental work later, once I landed in the city. But yeah, that's just a classic example. Also, just I didn't exercise. I had no like I hadn't grown up understanding how exercise was important. I was a metalhead who smoked behind the gym while everyone else was doing track. Like I was, wearing the leather jackets, and I wasn't into that.
Hmm.
So I didn't exercise really at all. Didn't understand how important that was, again, until I was sort of well on the way into my healing journey. It wasn't until I had probably been doing the SE work for, I'd say, a couple years that I really started exercising regularly with dedication. So yeah,
Yeah.
self-care, losing self-care is often a part of the spiritual bypass as
Yeah.
well, where you're just, or really more accurately, somatic bypass, as we've said, because the thing you're bypassing is your body by using the power of your spirit. So it's really sort of a spiritual delusion that bypasses the body entirely in many ways.
Yeah. And I did a lecture on somatic bypass and
Yeah.
spiritual bypass a little while ago, so we'll post that below too because it was a good one. Okay, so what do you feel that we've left out here? This is, we don't, what's the next piece that you want to share with people about this
Yeah, because really,
path?
if we're talking about the path of, and what we're talking about is, if we're talking about my story, is healing developmental trauma, early developmental trauma, layered with complex trauma, which is the most common picture that we see, in our
Yeah.
practices, because, of the nature of our society. So there's a lot of key pieces to that. So, like I mentioned, one, yeah, engaging with the things that are difficult, but you have to have the right support. So, that means foundationally, we need to look at relationships. I think that's a
Hmm.
really important thing to cover, because if your relationships aren't safe, if your relationships are toxic, if you can't be yourself, if they're abusive, of course, but even if like you
Yeah.
can't be authentic, if you can't fully express yourself, it's not safe. And also, a part of trauma often is recapitulating and rehashing all the attachment dynamics that were unhealed in the family system with the partners that you attract. And
Hmm.
oftentimes they'll be synchronistic, right? Where you're mirroring their unresolved stuff and they're mirroring your unresolved stuff. So I had a lot of relationships like that. I probably had four significant relationships during the time that I was living off grid. By the time the last one ended, which was in my community, super painful breakup,
Hmm.
I realized that was the first piece where I really started to realize, okay, something's really wrong. Like something needs to be addressed in me that I'm not aware of, because I keep on having these relationships with this same pattern, like three in a
Hmm.
row. And so I realized, okay, I'm not going to do no more relationships, no more romantic relationships until I figure this out. And that was really important. That was
Hmm.
that sometimes having a safe relationship means having a boundary against yourself, right? Against your own patterns, like when you see them in yourself. So what I did was I dedicated myself to cultivating within myself the things that I wanted to attract in a partner. I made a very specific list of all the things that I wanted in relationship, and I was like, I'm not doing it again until I meet someone that satisfies this list. And for about a year, I had that in my altar, and I meditated on different feminine archetypes, different goddess figures, cultivating those qualities in myself, inviting those energies in, having a safe relationship with the feminine on the inside,
Mm.
which was very, something that I thought was really helpful, because it got me to the place, I guess, in terms of my inner health, that I could meet you. And
Right.
right, because that's when you came into my life, is about after a year of
Mm.
doing these practices and being very clear about what I wanted, and not settling, and having a boundary with myself about what I was willing to engage with. So that's true at many levels, that need for good relationship, healthy relationship that supports you. So when I met you, it was, really perfect, because we seem to be able to, we talked, you said, mentioned how, after 4 days I proposed. Well, that was because in those 4 days, like, we were doing some really deep work with each other, but it
Mhm.
wasn't in this like triggering each other's stuff and about, like, way. It was like, really
It,
wonderful.
well, it was very advanced and very mature. It wasn't all
Yeah.
doty and
Yeah.
lovey and gushy.
Sentimental at all. Yeah.
None of that blech,
No.
grossness.
No, it's
We're just
very
not like
real
that.
and raw and
Yeah.
deep. And
Yeah.
that was like, okay, this is something to pay attention to, which is why I ended up moving to Canada, out
Yeah.
of paradise, right? So
Yeah.
relationships are really important. And if you find that you're engaging in the same toxic patterns over and over again, that's a time to sort of have a bit of a boundary with yourself, and to look at your relationships. Can I be myself? Is it safe to fully express all that stuff?
So I want to circle to the piece about relationship, but there's many people who may not have a partner or a person that's romantic, if we want to call it that, or intimate, but it also works with family members who are toxic, siblings who are toxic, friends who are toxic, jobs that a
Yeah.
person might be in. And I know I am no longer in private practice. I was for a very long time. As many people know, you are in private practice much more vigorously now. What are some kind of vignettes or just sort of proxies of stories that you've seen with people who aren't in a romantic relationship, but they're still working with their relationships
Mm,
on their own? Am I
yeah.
making sense with that question?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, because well, that's the case with a lot of my clients, is they may not have a partner, just because
Mhm.
of the various challenges, right, that they experience. But there's often, what I see, is a pruning process. Um, One, it's starting to recognize that, oh, this actually isn't really good. Like,
Yeah.
helping, sometimes I have to help my clients see, like, well, does that really feel good to you? Like, does that seem safe? Does that seem healthy? And so oftentimes when we get into this work, especially with early developmental trauma, which is all about attachment, safe attachment or not, growing up in a stressful or toxic or abusive family system, there
Hmm.
needs to be this pruning process that happens. And that can have various levels, right? It may be limiting your time with your family members. I mean, this is if they are toxic, if the relationships are not, good. Limiting your time with them, is one way. Sometimes, speaking your truth, putting it out there, like being direct, seeing what kind of response you get. Sometimes there can be like, oh, there's actually openness there. Sometimes
Hmm.
not, more often not. But then
Yeah.
you see, oh, there's no real room for me here. There's just this room for me to sort of be in this role that I've fulfilled, right?
And I want to touch on that because there are a lot of people who are struggling with finding intimate, let's just say relationship, because that kind of is the holy grail in many ways of humans, is finding that partner.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have family systems that look and are fairly good.
Mm,
They respect you, they don't scream at you, they didn't hit you, but the parents, if I just speak as if it's a couple, the
mm,
older parents, are still dysfunctional in their relationship,
right.
and the adult child is in that, and they're going through the motions of what they grew up with, but they're not realizing how being in that energy is actually limiting them and
Yeah,
stopping them from finding what is true for them because they're still, like you said, in that conditioned role.
that's right. That's
And I
right.
think that might be one of the hardest ones because it's not like, well, my mother just threw a plate at me. Well, that's
Right.
not good. Or my mother just told me I'm a worthless piece of poop.
Yeah.
Well, that's clearly not good. Or my father's still screaming at my mother. That's not good. But there's these little things that won't even seem toxic.
Yeah.
How would, like, what is your advice to someone who might be listening to this and they're like, oh shit, that I think is what's happening with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the one of the keys, again, sort of foundational pieces about healing trauma, especially this kind of trauma we're talking about, is finding your own authenticity. And you really can't attract your right relationship until you're in right relationship with yourself and your
Hmm.
own authentic truth. So if you're finding that you have to play a role, even a little bit, if you have to shape yourself or restrain yourself, in a family system like you're talking
Hmm.
about, where there's no
Hmm.
outright abuse, it's just,
Hmm.
it's kind of like, what we call the toxic norm. Like there's a lot of things that have been accepted as normal that are actually quite dysfunctional. And a
Yeah.
lot of adult relationships are like this, keeping secrets from each other. And so the number of people that have affairs and,
Hmm.
the secret addictions and there's all sorts of stuff that's just like, oh, that's just relationship. Well, no, that's dysfunctional relationship that's become normalized. So
Yeah.
if you know that you're in relationship in a family dynamic where you're in that energy field and you're those relational dynamics and you're engaging with them, it's something that you really got to look at. And it may mean that you have to pull yourself away for a time,
Yeah.
and your parents may not understand. If they're good parents, they will make space for you to do that anyway and be like, no worries, I love you, I'll be here when you're ready. That'd be
Hmm.
the best possible response and shows that there's a lot of promise there. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Lots of
No.
times people in a family system are really attached to you staying in your role as the traumatized person that you are and all the dynamics that they're used to. When you start deciding to change that, or to limit your time with the family, or to change how you are to be more authentic, there can be a real pushback
Yeah.
where they don't want, this, like, it can be angry, it can be hostile,
Yeah.
really defensive. And that would be a further cue that, like, oh, okay, I actually need a stronger boundary.
Hmm.
I may need to go a long time without even seeing or speaking to them.
Speaking out.
And that's okay. I wrote a whole article called "Why We Need to Break Up with Our Family Sometimes,"
Yep.
and we can link that below.
Hmm.
And it's just, sometimes there is no other way to heal yourself than to step out of that sort of soup that you grew up in and the way that you've become conditioned to it. And then you start to find your own truth, your authenticity. You can re-enter into that system in a way that is not so stressful for you. And that's what's happened for me. I'm now able to engage with my family members in a positive way
Hmm.
because I know, the amount of time that I can spend, and, I know how to limit it, and, and I can be myself, and it's
Hmm.
still kind of stressful because it's, very different lifestyles, but I can
Yeah.
do it and not pay a big price and not sacrifice my truth. So it's something that is often necessary, this boundary setting of various degrees. And that's what I would recommend exploring.
As we wrap up, there might be some people listening to this, watching this, that have never come across any of our stuff or my stuff, or they're have no clue what fight, flight, freeze is.
Mm,
And so I will say, dive in deeper to all those listening, watching into the work. But what would be your kind of top three, four things that a person start with
mm,
immediately if they have some little inkling that they might be the way you were, say 10, 12, 15, 20 years ago? They've tried the meditation, they've gone to all the guru retreats, they've sat in Bali and Costa Rica and Sedona and
yeah.
you know, and they're still afraid to engage with people, or they engage and then disaster happens, or there's these physical problems with the body, mental problems. I know my top sort of three. What would be your top three?
Mm. Well, the first thing, I think the top one is education.
Mm-hmm.
You got to understand yourself physiologically and how that affects your psyche and your emotions and your
Mm-hmm.
relationships and your behaviors. It all stems from the physiology. If we don't understand that, it's like there's nothing else there's nothing we can do. Like we got to
Yeah.
start with understanding that. So education, that's number one. I would say number two, even before maybe starting the work, is sort of the basic housekeeping type stuff, your
Mm-hmm.
relationships, your home environment, your work environment. Now, most people may not be able to change all of those things all at once, but you can
Yeah.
start to make gains and chip away and make some progress. Make a safe foundation for yourself. Because the third thing is starting the work.
Mm-hmm.
But the foundation of being able to do the work successfully, whether it be with a practitioner or like in one of our online programs, is that you have a foundation of safety that you can return to at the end of the day. Your home
Mm-hmm.
environment must be safe. And that, doesn't mean that you just tell yourself it's safe. You have to feel cellularly safe. You
Mm-hmm.
have to feel free to be authentic, to have your emotions express, to make weird sounds and movements, to follow your impulses. If you
Yeah.
don't have that, that's the second thing that you really got to start figuring out how to create for yourself. So, education, the foundation of safe home life, safe relationships, start putting up boundaries with toxic relationships, and then three, do the work. Just get into the work.
And so then to piggyback off of that, again, for those of you new who haven't seen some of my past videos, I have a video all on why non-dumbed down education is essential. You can't learn the education off of a meme on Instagram. It is impossible. You need to get into the deep theory. I think you can agree with me that the simplicity that we see on social media is a
It's
disaster
a
right now.
disaster. Oh my God. Like just the hacking the nervous system, like it's just there's so little refinement and it's so
Yeah.
important. Like,
It is, and I respect a lot of the. I do have respect for some of the top level scientists and that are trying to put out some little tidbits. I get it, but you need to understand the context because you'll see things like to regulate the nervous system to have 3 cold plunges a week. It's like wait, that has no context to it. Or to regulate your nervous system, tap 3 times on whatever, breathe out of the nostril here. Again, those practices can be very useful when you have context and you know how to listen to your physiology and work with it as a tool.
yeah.
So again, that's my soapbox, and I think we both are on the same box.
Yeah.
The second thing about safety, I do know, and you know, that a lot of our clients and students, whether it's your private folk or those in our courses, aren't in an environment that's safe because they're still living at home because they have to financially. So you can start this work
Yeah.
in that sense, but the goal is to break free of that.
Yeah.
And I do have a lecture all on cellular safety. So again, we'll pop it below. You guys have your homework cut out for
Yeah.
you. And then, of course, the third thing, which is to do the work, that is a whole body university degree in
Hmm.
itself.
Yeah.
Um, and everyone can learn about that through obviously my site. Smart
Yeah.
Body, Smart Mind is the main program that I know you recommend. I recommend, of course, because it's
Yeah.
what I offer. Based on some of the stuff you've done with your clients, and I know this will kind of go a little more into SBSM, Smart Body, Smart Mind mode, but how have you seen those that you work with who have had that base level foundation
Hmm.
with the education, with the practical exercises that are offered through the courses? Can you give a quick contrast comparison to those that you see who have done that baseline work versus those who come off the street? And you will work with someone, I know you will, who hasn't done that work. But
Totally.
what's the general differences that you see
Yeah.
when someone's had that foundational layering first.
Yeah, it's remarkable, really. I mean, the difference in the ability to absorb the work, to make sense of it, to implement it, is way more if someone has those foundations in place. Like
Hmm.
the clients of mine that have gone through Smart Body, Smart Mind, or your 21-day tune-up first, it's just a whole different thing. It's like because they have the language. It's like it's like you're now jamming. Like I'm a musician also, right? So it's like the
Yeah.
difference between jamming with someone who knows their theory and you can riff off of each other way differently than someone who just has very fourth grade level kind of can play the recorder. So
That'd
it's
be
a
like
whole
me.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a whole different thing when you have those foundations in place.
Yeah.
And another thing to add to that, which is really important, is it's not just about doing your programs. Someone can
Hmm.
do one of your programs and get no results because they're not understanding that it's not about listening to the exercise and then you're done. Like that's some of the
Hmm.
most important thing for people to understand about doing this work. If it's Irene's program, if it's a one-on-one practitioner you see once a week, it's not just about what happens in the office and in the audio exercise. It's about taking all of that in and making it part of your being, making it part of how you relate 24/7 to yourself and the environment and others. So it's about what happens when you're not in session, almost more than what happens when
Hmm.
you're in session. So those clients of mine that do the work, who have gone through your programs, who understand that it's about internalizing the audio lessons and making them part of how they relate, those are the ones that just have a much more rapid arc of healing and are able to get better, much
Yeah.
faster. Yeah.
That's like really important. And it it's always something that I struggle with because I know that everyone can heal through these means, but not everybody will.
Yeah.
And I even did a video on that a little while ago. We'll post it below. But it's sometimes very hard to convey that need to internalize and integrate because our general school system
Yeah.
doesn't teach us that unless we seek out higher level mentorship at a mastery level, like we're becoming a carpenter or electrician
Right.
or a chef, where you're not following a recipe, you just see the problem or you see the refrigerator and you know exactly what to do.
That's right.
And that level of learning, I get it. If someone has been struggling for 50 years and all of a sudden they're like, what? I have to spend the next 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or 1 year learning this? You got to be kidding me. However, here we are sitting in, like, we're recording this in 2021. This will probably go out in 2022. You started your journey truly, obviously, 20 years ago, but the real journey didn't start until about 10 years ago.
That's right. That's right. And I'd say it took me 7 years. I'll just one more little vignette. I'll
Yeah,
share the
this is
story.
important.
Yeah. So I was, this was about after I've been doing the work for about 7 years. I was at home, I was taking a bath, and our home is such that it's skinny and tall. It's 3 stories.
Hmm.
So, if Irene's upstairs at her office, I can hear her walking around and stuff. And I was laying there in the bath and I was just soaking and I was listening to Irene's footsteps walking back and forth. And I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's like, oh my God, I feel comforted and safe by the sound of her footsteps, not threatened. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever had that experience of not feeling at some base level threatened by the presence of someone else in the house, even my dearest loved one.
Hmm.
So that was about 7 years of consistently doing this work. And, it's hard to explain how rich the process is, how there's gains and wins all along the way.
Yeah.
And there's big struggles and pain all along the way. Like
Yeah.
you uncover something, it's difficult, you process it, you're victorious, you heal, you integrate, it's wonderful. That creates space and safety for the next thing to arise, which is
Hmm.
difficult and painful, and then you work with it, right? So it's this, you just keep on going. You just keep on going. And the more you do, the more capacity you grow to have these transformative experiences. So, yeah, after 7 years of consistently doing that, I realized, oh, it's just my wife upstairs. And that actually is very comforting and sounds nice. And I feel cozy. And that was novel. I had never felt
Yeah.
that before. And that's when I knew, like, okay, I'm really at a place of difference here. I'm really regulated. I'm like, my system is no longer responding to the triggers it used to. I just feel
Hmm.
basically good most of the time. All my symptoms are gone. So, yeah, it can happen.
And it can happen. And please, folks listening, do not be afraid by this 7 year
Yeah,
thing that Seth, because everyone's a bit different.
yeah. That's
Um,
me. Yeah,
and that's him. And in that span of 7 years, like you said, I just have to reiterate this.
mhm.
There were massive gains. We had a great stuff, life,
Oh, yeah.
travel, learning.
Yeah, I was growing my business. I was getting into private practice, like all stuff that would have been inconceivable. And that was just
Hmm.
a year or so into my healing, like
Yeah,
practice. So, no, yeah, don't get intimidated. I'm just trying to give a scope that it's
yeah.
like, it's not a quick fix. It's not a take this pill to solve problem B kind of thing. It's a whole lifestyle, integrative, transformational kind of journey.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so the moral of this story is meditation, cold plunges, being in nature,
Yeah.
all very good. They are tools to help aid the process of regulating and healing trauma. But the real kind of meat and potatoes is getting into this, as of course we know, I say all the time, working with the stress physiology, building capacity within the system, connecting with the internal, the external, knowing just the right amount to do, and then knowing when to pause, all the things we talk about.
Yeah.
Um,
Not
it's a
staying away
big,
from triggers, not staying
not
in
staying
safe
away from triggers.
spaces, right? Like it's not about
Yeah.
that.
And that's, I think, one of the hardest things to convey is there's a whole industry out there that is built around taking people's pain away. I
Yeah.
mean, hello, opioid crisis and all that. Um, and we have to change the narrative, which is we actually want to feel, within reason, of course. If you go and your leg's broken, please take pain
Yeah.
meds.
Yeah.
This is
Totally.
this is different, right? If it's this work, you want to feel the uncomfortableness, but you also have to do the groundwork to be able to be with the uncomfortableness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it
Yeah. It's
goes.
such a paradox. Like you have to have enough baseline of safety and knowledge to enter into things that feel unsafe.
Yep.
Right. It is very much it's like that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks,
Yeah.
Seth.
Yeah.
And just to end, everybody, thank you for watching. I have a feeling we'll do more of these chats. Leave your questions. And depending on when you're hearing this, depending on when this goes live, if you do want to work with us in this process, Seth's practice is closed. He has no more room. So get into the programs, getting to the online programs, specifically the 21-day nervous system tune-up, or if you're seeing this, hearing this before we close registration in 2022, which would be March 6th, get into the program, check it out. I have created the entire program. It's all my stuff is in there, and then you, Seth, you do the Q&As.
Yeah. Smart body,
And some
smart
of the
mind. You mean the
Smart
long
Body, Smart
program.
Mind.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the longer program, 12 weeks. You
Yeah.
do the Q&As, I do the training calls. And then, of course, we have an amazing team that moderates the forums. And it's just, I can vouch, it's probably the most comprehensive online course for healing trauma that exists to this day.
For sure.
So I'm, of course, biased, but you can vouch for that one.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. We will see you next time.